And we're back. My name is Jerry Katzman. I'm the host of Conference Live. I'm here with Eric Anctil, University of Portland Associate Professor and at the School of Education. It's great to see you.
Great, thanks for having me here, Jerry.
Eric, you closed out a session on Tuesday night, which was a bit of a rule breaker, a game changer. It's a type of, well, we have had other futurists on and we have had other thought leaders on, but I'd like you to kind of introduce our audience to the themes that you're speaking about as they pertain to technology and our industry.
Yeah, so in the work that I do, I'm really exploring our human relationship to the machines that we're building and how those machines change our behavior and how we're evolving with our machines. And when you have predictive analytics that tell you where to go to eat, how to drive your car to a particular area, what media you should be engaging in, you're giving a lot of control to that code, really. And that code is changing the choices that you're making as a person. And I think it happens invisibly, but when we stand back and look at it in aggregate, we realize, oh, we're surrendering a lot of power over our free will in a way.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious about and want to explore and encourage people to think about the ethical dilemmas that are at the center of a lot of those relationships, and also what is our obligation to young people who are growing up in these media-rich and technology-rich environments.
Right.
And how do we help them best navigate their evolution in these spaces?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you tell, let's say, a social media platform that you like one artist and another artist and a third artist, it starts to feed you, more artists like that, more politics like that. And at first it seems like a convenience, but where is the fine line between choice being given to you and choices being made for you?
Right, and choices being taken from you. So when you have, if Yelp tells you 10 restaurants that are near you in a particular cuisine that you're interested in, who got to pick those 10 or 12 restaurants? Who's already giving you a pre-selected menu of where you should eat?
Right.
And that's true in so many of our behaviors. So when we start thinking about like building smart buildings, we start thinking about and being really intentional in the kinds of spaces that we're designing for our future users, what kind of intentionality are we giving to the human experience within those spaces? Right, so like a good example would be trying to design classrooms that look like the world should look today, rather than a classroom from 1900. So we have classrooms today where kids still sit in rows and face the front of the room and stare at the tallest person who's talking.
Right.
And that doesn't feel like how our world is today.
No.
But we need a sea change in terms of the architecture and the design of that building that will more reflect, or that classroom, to more reflect how the world exists around us. When we make those decisions, in a way, we're almost kind of writing a code of how those students are going to learn. And I think that we have to be really intentional about those spaces so that we encourage things like collaboration. We encourage things like face-to-face contact, not discouraging those things, because that's really where our humanity is. It's in this, and it can be in this.
Right.
But we can't lose track of this. So we have to be, I think we just have to be really intentional in our design, whatever that design space might be.
So let's go a little deeper into this.
Yeah.
Those 10 restaurants that get suggested by Yelp, on the surface it seems very democratized, right? Because, well, 500 people say that's the best taco they've ever eaten, so great for me, I get to go to the place where, and by contrary, 100 people say that's the worst taco they've ever eaten, that doesn't get served up. But then you look at it like this, let's talk about those spaces. For last year, 2 years, 3 years ago, everyone's talking about, the open office, which would sound like and feel like, we're not doing that rows and rows and rows.
Yeah.
And yet, anecdotally, what comes back to me is, as cool as it looks, a lot of people do it.
Yeah.
So how do you, as someone who is involved in this conversation, meet the balance between we want to be inventive, futuristic, future thinking, forward thinking, and at the same time, we want to honor people's opinions, but we don't want to honor those opinions so much that we get lost in it. Where do you find yourself in that?
Wow, I think, I often, when I introduce myself, I tell people I'm not a technology evangelist, but I'm definitely a provocateur.
Yeah.
And I feel like my job sometimes is just to give things a quarter turn, so you step back and ask questions that maybe you weren't really thinking about, but when you start to see a couple of the dots be connected, you think, oh no, those are the kinds of questions we should have been asking.
Right.
So I try to provoke that, and I don't always have the answers. So to answer your question, where I find myself in this is, one of the things that I would want to know is why aren't these open spaces working? What's the resistance to that? And I think that there's this fundamental tension between people wanting to be individuals in their cube and have their space and the culture of that space, but also knowing that they need to engage in a wider space. Right. So how do we resolve that? And maybe it's about designing spaces that will give some, I don't know, territory to an individual, but at the same time create open spaces for the collective. But that might not be obvious on the surface.
Sure.
So exploring that kind of relationship to people and their habited spaces, I think, is where I would start to ask those kinds of questions.
When you think about this type of thinking as applied to space design, what are some of the examples that you look to and you go, yeah, those people asked some of the questions they should have asked before building?
Yeah, I think that I've been seeing new library spaces being built on universities.
Yeah.
And I walk in and I see students working. Well, one is traffic goes up in really well-designed libraries.
Right.
So the students see a new space that feels more reflective of their mindset, of how they want to be as a student, as a studier, as a collaborator. And when I walk into those spaces and I don't see a book, but I can tell it's a media center, of which books are part of that, and I can tell where people are collecting and how they're using the space and how they feel comfortable being alone in the space, but together.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of spaces I think, oh, this is working, and I think some libraries have really done a good job of hiring architects that are thinking forward. And the reason I know that it's working is because there are a lot of people on campus who are resistant to that change, and I think it's because we're in a sacred space, and if you want to have an innovative redesign, you have to ruffle some feathers. And I like that. And the people will come around because really the library is for those students. Faculty need to figure out a way to adapt to what those students want in that environment. But if the students are coming in there more and they're staying longer, we know that we're succeeding.
Point us toward the future in a couple other areas and examples that you see out there that seem to be applying this.
Yeah, so I was talking on Tuesday, looking into the future and thinking about artificial intelligence and augmented reality and virtual reality, and these things becoming more and more a part of our spaces. And as I look to the future, one of the things that I'm really encouraging designers to think about is when you're designing a space, in a way you're writing a code for a kind of application that your future user is going to use. And don't get so lost in efficiencies that you lose track of the humanity in that relationship. Are you thinking about the person, not just the user experience and efficiencies, but are you thinking about them more collectively and more holistically?
Right.
And I think that a good example is the addictive quality of a lot of our mobile devices has really worked against people.
Right.
And it's not helping us. And it's a personal digital assistant from which this grew, but we don't feel like we're being assisted. We feel in many ways like we're being, I don't know, confined, chained, addicted.
Right.
And so if the designers were to go back and say, how could we create an app that works with people instead of just trying to build efficiencies for our bottom line, then I feel like then we're fulfilling some of that ethical responsibility at the heart of the questions we should be asking. So when I look to the future, it's really about embedding more ethical decision making in design. And design isn't just buildings and it's not just code, it's all of it.
And all design is really just code for human betterment in this,
Yep. And sometimes I ask people, do you ever wonder if you're just the last line of executable code for an action that someone else wanted you to take, and they wrote all the code and led you to the point when you pressed buy, or when you pressed like, or when you pressed whatever it is, maybe you're just the last line of that executable code.
Yeah.
And when I suggest that to people, invariably people kind of recoil at that idea a little bit.
Yeah.
And I say, most of the decisions you make with your machines, you're executing the function that someone else designed for you. And I would say to that designer, you have a responsibility when that code is written, when that person presses execute the function of the code, that you do it in a way that respects their basic humanity. And that really is my message. And even though you may feel like you're a very small cog in this machine, you play a really important role because collectively, our ethical decisions really matter.
Eric, thank you for pressing our buttons.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It was a pleasure.
Jerry, super nice to be with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That's the kind of